right?
Yes, yeah. Back to what we were talking about. Black holes.
Which
Creating black holes at CERN.
black hole. So let's talk about what a black hole is. So a black hole is basically an object whose gravitational strength is so strong that light doesn't escape it. But what matters is two things. A, how big it is. In other words, what's its mass. But secondly, where that actually occurs, where the strength is so strong that light doesn't escape it, is dependent on how far away you're from it. So in the terms of gargantuan, right, it was a supermassive. We're talking about a star in that case, was probably, I don't know in terms of what Kip Thorne was thinking, but I imagine that it was roughly the size of, let's say, half of the solar system. It was a huge thing, right? We're talking about, if you place gargantuan where the sun is, it would stretch right past where Earth is. So we're talking about a really, really, really big object, right? If I flip that around and said, let's make the sun the black hole, shrink it down, right? We're now dealing with an object that is smaller than the city of New York, right? We're not dealing with a really big object, but the mass of it is still the same, which means that if I did that, the Earth wouldn't get sucked in, Mercury wouldn't get sucked in, they'd all stay in their orbit, exactly the same thing, because they're still that distance away from the center. You have to be really close, and I'm talking about, in this case, you have to be really meters from it, right? Or the mathematics, basically, it says maybe only a couple of kilometers from it, for it to actually really start being so strong that light can't escape it. So if you get that concept, the fact that if we create a black hole, the only ability of it to suck matter in means it has to have a very strong gravitational field very, very close to it, right? So let's now go to our primordial black holes, which CERN hypothetically could make. They don't make it, by the way. At the moment, they don't have the energy requirements to do that.
Okay.
We're dealing here with objects that are to the order of the size, I say 10 to the power of negative 35 meters. Now that number means nothing. But if I were to take a primordial black hole, so to speak, and increase it to the size of let's say...
and why is it called a primordial black hole?
Okay, because we believe, and this is the reason why, is because they believe that the early part of the Big Bang, early part of the universe created these little primordial black holes. Okay, the theory suggests, the mathematical theory suggests they were part of the early stage of the universe. And I'm talking about the early fractions of a second of the Big Bang, right? And this is what CERN is trying to do. Is to look, it's not just about what matter is made up of, but can we somehow create in a very, very, very small space? And I make that point particularly clearly because a lot of conspiracy theorists get this wrong. They want to create the early conditions of the Big Bang, right? And they go, oh, that energy, it's dangerous and so forth. But hold on, we're talking about energy in a really, 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 really tiny small space. So we're not talking about a huge amount of energy overall. We're talking about a really compact amount of energy in a really, really small space. You know, to give you an analogy, right? If you've ever seen, hopefully, Terminator 2, where Arnie sinks into the vat of molten iron, and I say, how hot is that? It's about 1,000 degrees. Well, that's hot, right? Or 1,000 degrees Celsius, so about 2,000 Fahrenheit. And then I say to my students, what about those sparklers that you have at New Year's Eve parties? How hot are they? And they go, oh, that's not hot. Well, I say, it's about the same temperature. It's about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,000 degrees Celsius. And they go, what? What's going? It's because that energy is packed in a really, really, really small spot. It's not the total. No, it's packed in a really, really small spot. And that's what temperature is. Temperature is a measurement of how much energy is in a really, really, really small spot. And so when, you know, it's not the total. And so when we say we want to create the conditions of the early Big Bang, we want to create the same temperatures in a really, really, really small spot. But it's not a total amount of energy in the sense of all-encompassing, destroy the world type of energy in any expression. Does that make sense?
Totally makes
Yeah?
sense.
Good.
I guess the question is like, can it slip out of their hands, and can it just expand beyond their control without them I think a lot of people just don't understand what you just described.
Okay. Of course it could slip on your hand. Have you
Yeah.
ever had a sparkler get out of control and the sparks land in your hand? Does your hand suddenly explode?
But
Does the
it could
universe explode?
it could light your house on fire, right?
Ah, yes, that's true. But we're dealing here with, okay, it's got to ignite something else that is itself got stored energy. You know, if a sparkler hits a vat of gasoline, yeah, that's dangerous. But it's not the sparks problem. It's the fact that you had gasoline beside you that could react with that little bit of energy. And in the case of the Big Bang, the CERN Hadron Collider, the amount of energy in those collisions, it did actually happen. In terms of they had an accident. Now people go, oh, accident. But again, put this into context. The way that CERN's particle accelerators work is that they have to create these really, really powerful magnets to make that turn around that 27-kilometer loop. And the only way you can make those really powerful magnets is using what we refer to as electromagnets. So, you know, a electromagnet, most people know, basically it's a coil. If you run a current through it, it acts as a magnet. And your doorbell works on that principle. But the problem is, if you want a strong magnetic field, you need a very strong current. And if you want a strong current, you need a current that's so high that doesn't melt the wires. So what they do is they cool these electromagnets down to under 3 Kelvin. Now, to give you perspective, that's minus 456 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're talking about really cold temperatures that they keep this in. And only then can they have the magnetic field strong enough to turn my hadrons around. Now, in 2008, when they first ran the machine, the beam actually lost its direction and it hit the sides of the tube that was in. Problem there is it heated up the side of the tube, which caused the gas, the helium in this case, helium was the liquid, it's liquid helium that's at temperature, caused it to raise in temperature. All of a sudden, the electromagnets weren't working properly because the temperature was higher. And as a result, this liquid helium went from a liquid state to instantly a gas state. Well, the gas expands, and as a result, it blew a hole in the pipe. Now, that hole in the pipe damaged a number of electromagnets in there, but it wasn't the case of the total destruction. No, it was basically a gas release, an explosion, caused instrument. But that was the end of the story, and it took a few months to fix it up. So you can't make this energy escape. You know, another way of thinking about it is that the energy of these collisions that's occurring here between these two protons is equivalent to the energy of a beating mosquito. That amount of energy, right? Remember, the energy we're talking about is all-encompassing energy. You know, it's the energy in a really, really, really tiny spot. But if you want to work out, well, how much energy is actually there? Well, it's equivalent to a mosquito, right? So we're not dealing with world-destroying energies amount here. We're dealing with temperatures in a really, really confined spot. And even if it does run out of control, yes, it might damage the equipment, but it's not going to be a case of, you know, it's not going to be an explosion or, put it this way, the people in Geneva have got nothing to worry about, and CERN's based in Geneva, right? If something happened in CERN, they would never know about it. In fact, if you were just across the border in France, in the small town, and I've crossed that border, literally it's 10 meters away from one of the detectors. If something happened, you wouldn't know about it because the amount of energy released is extremely small in the total amount, if it happened, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
We haven't answered the black hole question yet.
Right.
So the black hole, these primordial black holes are incredibly small, right? We're not dealing with gargantuan sizes. And I said to you, how about we try to get a perspective of how small these black holes are? If I were to take these primordial black holes and magnified its size to about the size of about a millimeter across, a few millimeters across, then comparatively, a grain of sand get this, a grain of sand in that comparison will be more than 10 times the size of our known universe. Let me stick that with you. Let me put it another way. If I have a millimeter, a few milliside black hole,
Okay.
and I say, well, what's the size of an atom, right? In that comparison, well, the atom would be the size of our our Milky Way, our galaxy, our Milky Way. So can you see the perspective here? I'm trying to say is that these black holes are not big. They are incredibly small, right? And the only way we can register their existence is of their energy that they give off. And we're talking about an incredibly small amount of energy, right?
Okay.
So these black holes are really, really small. Now people say, well, so who cares if they're small? They can grow. And I want to give 3 reasons why you shouldn't be worried. The first thing is that the theory is now clear. You know, Stephen Hawking, everyone knows of Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
Developed a theory that basically black holes do evaporate. They do actually radiate some energy. So over time, they actually shrink. Now, the rate at which they shrink is dependent on their size. So the black holes, such as in Gargantuan, well, they would take trillions, literally trillions of years to evaporate away. But our little tiny quantum black hole that CERN could create would practically evaporate within a microsecond, incredibly smaller time. They would not survive long at all. So that's the first reason. The second thing is, as I told you, they're so small that they would not actually be anywhere near any other matter to suck energy in. Remember my analogy of my grain of sand, right? And my atom is the size of the galaxy, right? Well, what's the likelihood of this grain of sand or this little tiny particle as it moves to actually hit anything when most of the atom is empty space, right? It's highly unlikely to ever strike anything. Now remember, it has to strike something within a given time, and it only lasts a fraction of a second. Again, it's not going to suck anything in before it completely disintegrates. And the last thing is this. People say, oh, CERN is doing these energy experiments and it's never been done before. And I tell you, actually, the energies that CERN does happens every day above our heads. So we have things called cosmic rays out in space, and they strike the atmosphere and hit the particles, the gas particles, as you know, these cosmic rays come in. And those cosmic rays have energies far higher than anything that CERN has produced. So in other words, what CERN is doing is actually a miniature version of what's already happening at our atmosphere. And we know this. We detected cosmic rays in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. We know that it exists. If they were to get energies to create black holes and the cosmic rays were already creating them in our atmosphere, remember these black holes would probably be created but then pop out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're still here. So the fact is that if CERN was able to make black holes, then our atmosphere would be creating them all the time. Other stars would be bombarded, other objects, other planets, other stars also bombarded by these cosmic rays. And we would be having black holes being created all the time. Now, again, we're still here. That universe is still here, right? So the fact is that the chances are is not. And I think part of the problem, I think what really is confusing, and is this: physicists have a tendency to go, oh, I wonder what happens and like this, and you know, just hypothetically in a very low key. And so when they say, yeah, we might be able to create black holes, and someone says, well, can it be dangerous? They go, oh yeah, well, whatever. And all of a sudden the media grabs on that and it's like, oh, that's dangerous and so forth. And in fact, John Ellis, who's a theoretical physicist based at CERN, I didn't actually get the chance to talk to him, but I did see him walking around. He does look like a crazy, wild, hairy guy. He was basically asked the same question: can it happen? And he simply said, nah. You know, he was blunt as is in the sense of no, absolutely not.